They called her child a curse, but the lonely rancher rode all night to bring them medicine. The scorching Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty main street of Redemption Creek, a town that wore its prejudices like badges of honor. Sarah Martinez clutched her 7-year-old daughter, Elena's hand tighter, as they hurried past the general store, where whispers followed them like tumbleweeds. "There goes the cursed child," Martha Henderson muttered loud enough for everyone to hear, her voice dripping with malice. "Mark my words, that girl brings nothing but misfortune." Eleanor's dark eyes filled with tears, but she kept walking, her small chin raised with the same defiant spirit her mother possessed. Sarah's heart ached watching her daughter endure the cruel whispers that had plagued them since Elena's birth, during the town's worst drought in decades. The townspeople blamed Elena for everything: failed crops, livestock deaths, even the preacher's broken leg. Their superstitions ran deeper than the dried-up creek beds, and no amount of reasoning could change their minds. "Mama," Elena whispered as they reached their small cabin on the outskirts of town. "Why do they hate me so much?" Sarah knelt down, brushing a strand of dark hair from her daughter's face. "They don't understand that you're special, Mija. Sometimes people fear what they don't understand." What the town didn't know was that Elena possessed an extraordinary gift. She could sense when animals were sick or injured, drawn to them by an instinct she couldn't explain. Sarah had watched in amazement as her daughter's gentle touch seemed to calm even the most agitated creatures. 20 miles away, on the sprawling Double R ranch, Jack Riley sat alone on his porch, nursing a cup of bitter coffee and a lonelier heart. At 35, the weathered rancher had built his reputation on hard work and fair dealing, but success couldn't fill the emptiness that echoed through his ranch house each night. Jack had heard the stories about the cursed child in Redemption Creek, but unlike the townspeople, he'd learned not to judge without seeing. His own childhood had taught him that sometimes the most beautiful souls wore the heaviest burdens. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of approaching rain, a rare blessing in this parched land. Jack stood, his weathered hands gripping the porch rail as he watched storm clouds gather on the horizon. Something told him this night would change everything. In town, Dr. William Morrison packed his medical bag with trembling hands. At 62, he'd seen every ailment the frontier could offer, but tonight felt different. A strange sickness had begun spreading through Redemption Creek, children burning with fever, adults collapsing from exhaustion. His limited supplies wouldn't last long, and the nearest help was days away. As lightning illuminated the sky, Sarah tucked Elena into bed, unaware that their world was about to shift forever. The child who had been blamed for every misfortune was about to become the key to saving them all. The storm was coming, bringing with it a test that would reveal the true character of everyone in Redemption Creek. And in the darkness, a lonely rancher would discover that sometimes the greatest curses are actually the most precious blessings in disguise. If you want to see how this incredible story unfolds and discover the shocking truth about Elena's gift that will leave the entire town speechless, smash that subscribe button right now. You won't believe what happens next. And I guarantee Chapter 2 will give you chills. Hit the bell icon because this story gets more intense with every chapter. The storm hit Redemption Creek like divine wrath, turning the dusty streets into rivers of mud. Inside the Morrison house, Dr. William Morrison wiped sweat from his brow as he examined young Tommy Fletcher, the blacksmith's son. The boy's fever had spiked dangerously high, and 3 other children lay in similar conditions throughout the town. "Doc, what's wrong with them?" Frank Fletcher asked, his massive hands trembling as he watched his 8-year-old son writhe in delirium. "I don't know, Frank," Morrison admitted, his voice heavy with defeat. "It's unlike anything I've seen. The fever comes fast. Then they fall into this strange sleep. My medicine isn't helping." Outside, lightning split the sky as if nature itself was angry. The rain that the town had desperately needed now felt like punishment, trapping everyone indoors while the mysterious illness spread. At the Double R Ranch, Jack Riley stood in his barn, watching his prize stallion, Thunder, pace nervously in his stall. The magnificent black horse had been acting strange all evening, whinnying and stamping as if sensing something beyond human perception. "Easy, boy," Jack murmured, but Thunder's distress only intensified. Suddenly, through the storm, Jack heard it, a sound that made his blood run cold. It was Elena, the little girl from town. Her voice carried on the wind like a ghostly whisper, but she wasn't crying. She was singing, a haunting melody that seemed to calm Thunder instantly. Jack stepped out into the storm, rain immediately soaking through his clothes. There, barely visible through the downpour, he saw a small figure walking through his pasture. Elena moved with purpose, her arms outstretched as she approached his sick cattle, animals he hadn't even realized were ill. "What in the hell?" Jack breathed, watching in amazement as the girl placed her tiny hands on the flank of his favorite heifer, Buttercup. The cow, which had been lying on her side in obvious distress, slowly rose to her feet. Without hesitation, Jack ran through the mud toward the child. "Little girl, what are you doing out here?" Eleanor turned, her dark eyes reflecting the lightning. She wasn't afraid, despite being alone in a storm miles from home. "The animals told me they were hurting," she said simply, as if this explanation made perfect sense. "They called for help." Jack stared at her, rain dripping from his hat brim. In all his years ranching, he'd never seen anything like it. The child stood before him, soaked to the bone, but radiating a calm that seemed to extend to every animal around them. "How did you get here?" he asked, kneeling to her level. "I walked. Mama's sleeping, and the animals needed me." Elena's voice held no fear, only certainty. "Your horses are sick too, but I can help them." Back in town, Sarah Martinez woke with a start, immediately sensing Elena's absence. Panic seized her heart as she searched their small cabin, calling her daughter's name into the storm. "Elena! Elena! Where are you?" The rain muffled her cries, but desperation drove her into the night. She had to find her daughter before the townspeople discovered Elena was missing. They'd blame her for the storm, for the sickness, for everything wrong in their world. Meanwhile, Jack led Elena into his barn, watching in wonder as she moved from stall to stall. Each horse she touched seemed to find peace, their labored breathing easing, their restless movements calming. "How do you do that?" Jack asked softly. Elena looked up at him with eyes far too wise for her 7 years. "I don't know. I just feel what they feel, and I want to make it better." Something stirred in Jack's chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. This child, branded as cursed by an entire town, possessed the purest heart he'd ever encountered. "Elena," he said gently, "there are sick children in town. Do you think you could help them too?" The little girl nodded without hesitation. "I felt them calling too. That's why I came. The animals led me here first, but the children need help more." As thunder rolled across the sky, Jack made a decision that would change everything. He would take this cursed child back to the town that rejected her, and together they would face whatever lay ahead. The storm was far from over, and the real test was just beginning. Jack saddled Thunder quickly, his hands moving with practiced efficiency, despite the urgency coursing through his veins. Elena stood nearby, completely unafraid of the massive stallion that had been spooked minutes earlier. "Can you ride, little one?" Jack asked, lifting her onto Thunder's back. "The horse says he wants to help too," Elena replied, patting Thunder's neck. The stallion stood perfectly still, as docile as a lamb under her touch. Jack swung up behind her, wrapping his arms protectively around the small child. "Hold on tight. We're going to ride fast." They plunged into the storm, Thunder's hooves pounding against the muddy ground as lightning illuminated their desperate journey. Jack had made this ride countless times, but never with such precious cargo, never with so much at stake. Tell me about the sick children, Elena called over the wind. Doctor Morrison says they have a fever that won't break. They're dying, Elena. The child was quiet for a moment, then said with heartbreaking certainty, "They're not sick the same way the animals were. Something else is wrong." Jack felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm. "What do you mean?" "The animals were sick in their bodies. The children—" Eleanor paused, her small hand pressed against her chest. "The children are sick in their hearts. They're afraid." As they rode through the night, Jack found himself thinking about his own childhood, about being different, about being judged, about the loneliness that came with not fitting in. This little girl, carrying burdens no child should bear, reminded him of himself at that age. "Elena," he said as they neared town, "whatever happens in there, I want you to know something. You're not cursed. You're blessed. Don't let anyone tell you different." In Redemption Creek, chaos reigned. 3 more children had fallen ill, and Dr. Morrison was at his wits' end. Parents huddled in their homes, praying and pointing fingers, convinced that the cursed child's presence in their town had brought this plague upon them. Sarah Martinez burst into the doctor's office, soaked from the storm and wild with worry. "Dr. Morrison, please, have you seen Elena? She's missing." Morrison looked up from young Sally Peterson, whose fever had just spiked dangerously. "Sarah, I haven't seen her, but we have bigger problems. The children, all of them?" Sarah's face went pale. 6 children now? Whatever this is, it's spreading fast. Outside, the sound of approaching hoofbeats cut through the storm. Jack and Elena arrived like riders from a legend. Thunder's black coat gleaming in the lightning as they stopped before the doctor's office. The few townspeople brave enough to venture out into the storm gasped when they saw Elena. Martha Henderson pointed an accusing finger from her porch. "There she is, the cursed child. She brought this plague upon us." "Mama!" Elena called out, sliding down from Thunder's back and running into Sarah's arms. "Adamija, what were you doing out there?" Sarah held her daughter tight, relief and fear warring in her voice. Jack dismounted, his tall frame commanding attention even in the storm. "She was helping," he said firmly. "This child has a gift, not a curse." "Gift?" Dr. Morrison stepped forward, desperation making him willing to listen to anything. "What kind of gift?" Elena looked up at the adults surrounding her, then walked confidently toward the doctor's office. May I see the children, please?" The crowd parted, some in fear, others in curiosity. Jack placed a protective hand on Elena's shoulder as they entered the office, where 6 children lay burning with fever. Elena moved to the first child, little Tommy Fletcher, and gently placed her hand on his forehead. The room held its breath. "He's not really sick," Elena said softly. "He's scared. He heard the grown-ups saying bad things would happen, and he got so frightened it made his body hot." Dr. Morrison stared in amazement as Tommy's breathing began to even out. That's not medically possible." But Elena was already moving to the next child, then the next. With each touch, each whispered word of comfort, the children's conditions improved. Not through magic or supernatural power, but through something far more powerful, pure, unconditional love, and the ability to heal fear with understanding. As dawn approached, the storm began to clear, and 6 children opened their eyes for the first time in days. The town of Redemption Creek was about to learn a lesson about the difference between curses and blessings. As the first rays of sunlight pierced through the dissipating storm clouds, a crowd gathered outside Dr. Morrison's office. Word had spread quickly through Redemption Creek. The children were recovering, and it was Eleanor, the supposed cursed child, who had been instrumental in their healing. Dr. Morrison emerged from his office, his weathered face showing a mixture of exhaustion and amazement. The crowd pressed forward, hungry for answers. "Doc, what happened in there?" Frank Fletcher demanded, his voice tight with emotion. Morrison removed his spectacles, cleaning them slowly as he chose his words carefully. "I've been practicing medicine for over 30 years, and I've never seen anything quite like this. The children weren't suffering from any disease I could identify. Their symptoms were real, but the cause... He paused, looking toward Elena, who stood quietly beside Jack. The cause was fear. Fear, Martha Henderson scoffed. Children don't get deathly ill from fear. Actually, they can, Morrison continued. When a community is gripped by terror, when children constantly hear that something terrible is going to happen, their young minds can manifest physical symptoms. We call it psychosomatic illness. The mind affecting the body. Jack stepped forward, his hand still protectively on Elena's shoulder. What Dr. Morrison is trying to tell you is that your fear created the very thing you were afraid of. The crowd murmured uneasily. Sarah Martinez held her daughter close, tears streaming down her face as she realized the burden her child had been carrying. Elena, despite her young age, stepped forward with dignity beyond her years. "I'm not cursed," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I never was. When the drought came the year I was born, it wasn't because of me. When Mr. Peterson's crops failed, it wasn't because of me. When animals get sick, when people are sad, it's not because of me." Her words hung in the morning air like a revelation. "But I can feel when things hurt," Elena continued. "Animals, people, even the land sometimes. And when I can help make the hurt go away, I do. That's not a curse. That's what people are supposed to do for each other." Frank Fletcher, the big blacksmith who had been one of Elena's harshest critics, knelt down to the child's level. His eyes were red with shame and gratitude. "Little girl," he said, his voice breaking. "My Tommy. He's been having nightmares for months, saying the cursed child was going to hurt him. But you made him better." Eleanor reached out and touched Frank's massive, calloused hand. "Oh, no, Tommy was scared because the grown-ups were scared. Children feel what we feel. When you stopped being afraid of me, he stopped being afraid too." Dr. Morrison nodded sagely. "The child is right. What we witnessed wasn't supernatural healing. It was the power of compassion overcoming fear. Elena's gift isn't mystical. It's profoundly human. She has an extraordinary capacity for empathy." Jack watched the townspeople process this information, seeing shame replace suspicion on many faces. But it was what happened next that truly amazed him. Old Mrs. Patterson, who had been one of Elena's most vocal critics, stepped forward slowly. Her arthritic hands shook as she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small wooden horse, a toy her late husband had carved years ago. "Another child," she said, her voice trembling. I've been carrying this for 20 years, since my grandson died of fever. I blamed you for bringing sickness to our town, but the truth is, I've been sick with grief all this time." Eleanor accepted the wooden horse with reverence, then looked up at Mrs. Patterson with those wise, dark eyes. "Your grandson isn't gone," she said softly. "He's in all the good things you remember about him. The sickness isn't grief. The sickness is forgetting to remember the love." Mrs. Patterson broke down crying, and for the first time in 20 years, her tears were healing rather than bitter. One by one, other townspeople began to approach Elena, not with fear, but with apologies. They had projected their own fears, their own losses, their own pain onto an innocent child, making her carry burdens that were never hers to bear. Sarah watched in amazement as her daughter, with wisdom far beyond her years, helped heal not just the sick children, but the sick hearts of an entire community. As the sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the storm clouds, Jack realized something profound had happened in Redemption Creek. A little girl hadn't performed miracles. She had simply shown a community that the real curse was fear itself, and the only cure was understanding, compassion, and the courage to face their own hearts. But the most important healing was yet to come. 3 months later, the town of Redemption Creek looked like a different place entirely. The late autumn sun cast golden light over Main Street, where children played freely without fear, and neighbors greeted each other with genuine warmth rather than suspicious glances. Elena Martinez walked confidently through the town square, no longer the outcast, but a beloved member of the community. Her gift for understanding animals had become an asset to the local ranchers, and her wisdom, remarkable for a 7-year-old, had helped resolve several disputes between neighbors. But the most significant change wasn't in the town. It was in the unlikely friendship that had blossomed between Elena, her mother Sarah, and Jack Riley. Jack had become a regular visitor to the Martinez cabin, helping with repairs, bringing supplies, and gradually becoming part of their small family. The lonely rancher had found what he'd been searching for all his life, not just love, but purpose and belonging. On this particular afternoon, Jack sat on the porch steps, watching Elena teach the neighborhood children how to approach nervous horses. Her patience and gentleness had already prevented 2 potential accidents, and several parents now sought her advice when their animals were distressed. Sarah emerged from the cabin, carrying a tray of lemonade and wearing a smile that had become more frequent in recent months. "She's remarkable," Jack said, accepting a glass and nodding toward Elena. "I've never seen anyone with such a natural understanding of living things." "She gets that from her father," Sarah replied softly. It was the first time she'd mentioned Elena's father, who had died in a mining accident when Elena was just 2 years old. Miguel had the same gift with animals. I think that's part of why Elena's always felt different. She inherited something special from him. Jack reached over and took Sarah's hand. Over the past 3 months, their relationship had grown from friendship to something deeper, built on mutual respect and shared love for Elena. "Sarah," Jack began, his voice slightly nervous, "I've been thinking about something." Before he could continue, Elena ran up to them, her face bright with excitement. "Mama, Jack, Mrs. Patterson's cat had her kittens, and one of them is very sick. Can we go help?" Jack stood up, smiling. "Of course we can, little one. That's what neighbors do, they help each other." As they walked toward Mrs. Patterson's house, Jack reflected on how much his life had changed. The Double R Ranch no longer felt empty. Sarah and Elena visited regularly, and Jack had begun to hope they might make it their permanent home. At Mrs. Patterson's house, they found the elderly woman holding a tiny, barely breathing kitten. Elena immediately knelt down, gently taking the small creature in her hands. "He's not sick," Elena announced after a moment. "He's just smaller than the others, and he's afraid he's not strong enough. But he is. He just needs to know someone believes in him." Elena held the kitten close to her heart, whispering to it in the same gentle tone she used with all animals. Gradually, the tiny creature began to respond, its breathing becoming stronger and more regular. "There," Elena said, handing the now alert kitten back to Mrs. Patterson. "He just needed to feel loved." Mrs. Patterson's eyes filled with tears of gratitude. "Child, you've given this old woman more joy in 3 months than I'd felt in 20 years. As they walked home in the early evening light, Jack finally found the courage to say what had been in his heart for weeks. "Sarah, Eleanor," he began, stopping in the middle of the dusty street, "and I know we haven't known each other very long, but these past months have been the happiest of my life." Elena looked up at him with those perceptive dark eyes. "You want to ask Mama to marry you?" she said matter-of-factly. Jack laughed, no longer surprised by the child's intuition. "Is it that obvious? You love us, and we love you," Elena replied simply. "Now that's how families are supposed to work." Sarah's eyes sparkled with tears of joy as Jack knelt down on one knee, right there in the middle of Main Street, producing a simple gold ring that had belonged to his grandmother. "Sarah Martinez, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? And Elena, would you let me be your father?" Elena threw her arms around Jack's neck before Sarah could even answer. "Yes, but can we still live in town sometimes? The animals here need me too." "Of course," Jack replied, looking up at Sarah, who was nodding through her tears. As the sun set over Redemption Creek, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, the townspeople who had once shunned Elena now gathered around to congratulate the new family. The child they had called cursed had become their greatest blessing, teaching them that the real magic in the world wasn't supernatural. It was the power of love, understanding, and acceptance to transform fear into hope. Dr. Morrison, watching from his office window, smiled and made a note in his journal. Today I witnessed the greatest healing of all, a community learning to love instead of fear. If that's not a miracle, I don't know what is. The curse of Redemption Creek had been broken, not by magic or divine intervention, but by the simplest truth of all, that every child is a blessing and every act of compassion has the power to change the world. In the distance, thunder rumbled, not the angry storm of months past, but the gentle promise of rain that would nourish the land and help all living things grow strong and free.